summit. I also want to acknowledge some other people in the audience, Representative Betty DeGoo from this area, from Lachier. Thank you. And also Jody Butler, who used to be my education assistant when I was governor before. And I think now working with the Iowa State Education Association. So Jody, thank you for joining us. And I want to thank all of you for coming out on this hot day. I think we have at least one guy from Senator Grassley's office, right? And your name is?
Fred Schuster.
Fred Schuster from Senator Grassley's office. We have any other?
Senator Harkin's office.
Senator Harkin's office, who?
Allison Hart.
Allison Hart from Senator Harkin's, and Senator Harkin will be one of the presenters. He is the chair of the committee that's at the national level that in the Senate that will handle the reauthorization of the education, the national law. So he's a very key player on education, and he also is one of our participants in the summit. It's an honor for me to be back in Sigourney today and have this opportunity to talk to you about education. One of the reasons I ran for governor again was to restore Iowa's education system to being best in the nation and to assure that our students get a globally competitive education, because we are truly in a global economy. I just returned from the National Governors Meeting in Salt Lake City, and we had governors from 4 of the provinces in China there. And we see dramatic changes taking place in that country, significant development, and many of their students excelling in math and science. And that's who we're competing with, and not just with China, but other countries all over the world. We are proud of the tradition of giving our children the best possible education. But Iowa has not kept pace with some of the other states in recent years, and that's not acceptable. We live in an increasingly knowledge-based global society. To be successful, that means that most of our students, not just some, must have strong foundation in math, science, English, language arts, and social studies. It means that they need skills in critical thinking, and they need to know how to communicate confidently. We want them also to be innovative, because it's innovation that creates the new opportunities and the jobs of the future. Otherwise, they will not be able to land the jobs that they want and that will provide them a good living for their lifetime. A growing number of jobs will require at least some post-secondary education, from some training to a 4-year degree or beyond that, graduate level degrees. It's shameful that a significant number of high school graduates need remedial help when they get to college today. It's not just our children who will pay a price if we're not competitive. The state's economic development efforts will also suffer. We will have a harder time attracting new and innovative companies to our state, encouraging existing businesses to expand and to grow here as well. We won't be able to generate enough good jobs that will encourage more of our young people to stay and live and raise a family in Iowa. We need systemic reform that will make it possible for our educators to increase the achievement of our students. One of the changes needed in the schools is to create a more supportive working environment for teachers. They need more time. They need more time for useful professional development. They need more time to collaborate and design lessons, among other things. And now I want to turn it over to Lieutenant Governor Kim Reynolds.
Thank you, Governor. Well, I just want to reiterate the Governor's comments, too. We really appreciate you being here this afternoon. You're an extremely important part of the process. We look forward to the dialogue when we get done, and we look forward to your comments and your questions. This is, I think, our 3rd town hall. They've been very well attended, and we've had some great feedback. And then last week, we had our first, the roundtable series with business and higher education, and then we heard from teachers. And so they were live streamed, I think, and it was, honestly, it was a great opportunity. They were very well received, and we really have already received a lot of good feedback. So we need to work together to give all students a world-class education. And that means parents and educators, elected officials, businessmen and businesswomen, and other community leaders as well. You know, some changes are not going to be very costly, and other changes or reforms will require a pretty significant investment. So we want to make sure that that investment is smart and in strategic ways, we can't simply afford to continue the status quo. At the Iowa Education Summit, we are focusing on 3 areas: increasing teacher and principal effectiveness, raising academic standards and putting in place strong matching assessments, as well as using innovation to increase learning. Please keep in mind that Iowa students saw among the slowest growth in the nation in 8th grade math and 4th grade reading in the last decade. And some people blame Iowa's drop in the rankings on the national test as a result of more minority students struggling to learn. We need to do better at addressing the glaring achievement gap. Many Black and Hispanic youngsters are at a tragic disadvantage academically. But the fact is that national test scores for Iowa's white students in 4th grade reading and in 8th grade math were either stagnant or declined. Contrast that with white students across nationally who have shown a steady progress, as you see on the Iowa report cards that were handed out as you came into the town hall today. We need to make sure that students have the opportunity to get a first-rate education, and to do that, some changes do need to be made in the classroom, but parents and others in the communities also need to figure out a way that how we can be more supportive of the work teachers and other educators are doing. And with that, we look forward to hearing your comments, to hearing your questions, and to having you participate in this conference.
Okay, now, the 3 of us will try to help answer the questions. So any one of us or whatever, but you go ahead and address the question, and we'll try to work together and answer it. Yes, sir.
Governor Branstad, David G. I'm a graduate student at the University of Iowa.
Okay.
I'm also the chair of the Iowa State Education Student Program. I just want to start by saying I really respect the rhetoric that you and Lieutenant Governor Reynolds have been using so far. I hope that the policies reflect that. I guess I want to question the one thing I'm sure all educators and people who care about education are wondering right now, and that's Governor Christie coming in to be your keynote speaker.
No, he's not the keynote speaker. He is one of the speakers. Actually, Arnie Duncan, the U.S. Secretary of Education, is the keynote speaker.
All right, thank you for that correction. But Governor Christie having a 43% approval rating, 54% of the people in his state do not agree with his education policies. He cut $1.3 billion education and educators in his first 3 months. He's being protested against by school boards, administrators, educators, students, and parents. I'm just wondering what you feel his contribution to education in the state of Iowa will be, and who's funding his trip here.
Well, he's being funded the same way as all of the...
Actually, he's paying for it.
He actually is? Okay, I thought we were... Okay, okay, we're not in that case. We are paying for some of them. Governor Hunt is also coming from North Carolina. He's a former Democratic governor, friend of mine who started the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards. I think we have a good diversity of presenters, and let me just say this about Governor Christie. He's got the same challenge that a lot of governors have. He inherited a big financial mess. He was elected, his state faced a huge budget deficit, and he's had to make a lot of tough decisions. But you can look all over the country, whether they're Republican or Democratic governors. The governor of New York's doing similar things. Illinois, California, those have Democratic governors. So, and he also has just recently done a major reform of the retirement system. Did you know that the teacher retirement system was only 54% funded in the state of New Jersey? Now, New Jersey has actually done pretty well. They have one of the higher achievements. I think they're actually, Massachusetts is #1, but I think New Jersey is relatively high in achievement, and we're interested in why New Jersey's been able to do so well. And I guess I would just encourage you and others that have some skepticism to come and hear it. He did come in and campaign for me. I was very impressed with him. I think he's a very direct and straightforward person. As I said, he's like a lot of governors. He inherited a big financial mess, and he's in the process of getting it straightened out. And when you do that, and when you have to say no in a state like New Jersey, where they have among the highest paid teachers in the country and one of the best retirement systems, but it was not funded, and they had to make dramatic changes. He did get the Democratic Speaker of the House and the Majority Leader of the Senate to work with him in a legislature controlled by the opposition party to get the reforms of the pension system approved. And that is designed to make this system sustainable for the long term. So that's the thing, I would just encourage you to come with an open mind and listen to all the speakers and recognize that we have, I think Arnie Duncan is another one who's got some very good ideas on education reform. He started the Race for the Top, and he has specifically targeted money to assist schools that are doing major reforms and improvement in education. Unfortunately, Iowa's missed out on that because we have not been as innovative as other states, and we want to learn how we can be more effective. Our new director of education is Jason Glass. When he was in Colorado, he actually worked with the teachers union to come up with a system to pay teachers based on student performance. And he did it in a collaborative way, and it's been successful. And so that's what we want to look at, is all the different ideas, and then try to choose the ones that are going to be the best for Iowa's future.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes, sir. My name is Jim Hussey. I'm live in Kelowna. I'm the president of the Big Prairie School Board. I'm also a parent, and that's probably the most important role. And on the handouts that you gave us today, there's a graph from PISA talking about the different countries and how they do relative to each other. And Shanghai was on top of the list, followed by South Korea, Singapore, Finland, and Hong Kong. And as you noted, America is very average. And here's a headline from last week's Business Week. It says, "Koreans shudder at no schools on Saturday, mothers revolt." I have family members from Taiwan, Singapore, India, and South Korea that visited schools, both at the elementary and high school level in Shanghai. Because of my limited skills, I was able to eat dinner with the Shanghai Minister of Education, the man who's responsible for several million students in Shanghai. And my wife is from Taiwan. My kids used to attend Chinese school in Iowa City every Sunday afternoon. And those Chinese parents would sit around a big table for 3 hours every afternoon. And they would never talk about football or basketball or baseball. They would be talking about orchestra and debate and math and talking about the very best schools in the state of Iowa. And at the University of Iowa's recent math tournaments, here are some of the last names of the most recent winners. An, Mi, Lin, Xie, Han, and Ye. Sure, I cherry-picked those names, but you don't have to be a genius to know that certain people are statistically overrepresented. And I'm going to cut to the chase here, and I'm going to just ask you, what would a school system based on those Asian Confucian values look like here in Iowa? And to follow up your comments earlier, Governor Branstad, students would be in class 4 hours each day and more days each year, including Saturday mornings. Students aren't bad at math. They either work hard or they don't. Parents would make huge sacrifices, including the short-term alienation of the affection of their children to ensure academic success. Football, basketball, baseball, and volleyball would be club sports, unaffiliated with schools and unfunded by taxpayers. And all of us would quit celebrating when we hit NCLB targets in one language, English, and we would reverse Iowa's English-only law, and instead we would do what other countries do, which is teach 2, 3, and 4 languages starting in kindergarten. And my sense is we simply don't have the political will or the cultural will to make these sacrifices, and we need to start looking in the mirror. And just one last thing here, from the Business Week, that same article, Japan cut its school week from 6 days to 5 in 2002. In 2009, when Japan started sliding down those same ratings, they revolted again, and Japan has now added since 2009, has added 270 hours back to the elementary school year and 105 hours back to junior high. And one last thing, I'm sorry, I lied a little bit. Meanwhile, 200 million Chinese kids are studying English, starting in 1st and 2nd grade, and South Korean parents recently, and this is a quote from the Business Week, or actually Newsweek, that just came out yesterday in my mailbox. South Korean parents recently threw a collective hissy fit, demanding that their children begin English instruction starting in 1st grade rather than 2nd. Now at Mid-Prairie, we taught Arabic and we continue to teach Chinese starting in kindergarten grades. And I'm just wondering, do you think that Iowans and Americans have the kind of will that is demonstrated every day across the world by billions of other people?
If we don't, we're going to be second class in the future. Because the truth of the matter is, we're in a world economy. I just came back from the governor's conference. We had 4 Chinese provincial governors that were there. And the lieutenant governor just returned from a trip to South Korea and China. And I'll let her speak to this too. But the truth is, and you're exactly right, especially in these Asian cultures, but it's also true in Finland and many other parts of the world, they are very determined and very committed. And we're in a very competitive world situation, and you know, where are the jobs of the future going to be? And we're not talking about low-paying jobs now. We're talking about people with these kind of skills, math and science skills, and whatever. Those, in places like India and China, they are becoming very, very competitive, and the growth in those areas is phenomenal, and it's related to their success in education.
Well, and part of the reason, you know, that we're holding the town halls and we're having the education summit is so we can continue the dialogue, so we can talk about exactly what you're talking about. Because as I indicated earlier, it can't just be about the students, it can't just be about the teachers, it has to be about the parents, and it has to be the overall structure. I just got back from my first trade mission to China. I started in Seoul, South Korea. I was visiting with educators. They just passed a law where they had to stop parents from hiring for tutoring their children past 11 o'clock because they were in longer school days. They were going 5-6 days a week. The days are longer, and then when the students were coming home, the parents were hiring tutors, and they were learning all night long. So they actually had to pass a law to prevent that, you know, from happening past 11 o'clock. So that's the commitment that other countries are putting towards education. We need to keep talking about that. We need to be aware of it. We need to build a consensus, and then we need to take a look at how we restructure and we deliver the education that our students need to go globally compete. And so we have a workforce ready to meet that global.
But I think the information you provided is very sobering,
Yeah, it
and it's
is.
very true. And you know, you look at the number of kids in China, the number of kids in India. I mean, so it's not just quality; it's the quantity that we're up against as well. Okay.
I am Ruth Johnson, a physical educator, retired from Davenport, West High. Have had some success in coaching. Was the first woman on the board of directors for the Iowa Girls High School Athletic Union, and served.
And that's a great program, the Girls High School Athletic Union. I think it's one of the best in the country.
I have several concerns, especially as we're going in this direction. Now, in Davenport, you mentioned health as a
Right.
very important thing. The fitness level of students is an extremely pivotal component to acquiring academic achievement. The majority of high academic achievers also have high fitness levels. And likewise, the majority of lower academic achievers are among the lowest fit. As fitness improves, two things generally happen. Less time is required in study, and academic achievement is elevated. Recent studies show that Texas students that were physically fit did better on standard tests, attended school more regularly, and had fewer disciplinary actions. And therefore, I would encourage you, please, to consider appropriating a greater percentage of each school day toward improving student fitness.
Well, thank you. I think your point is a very good one. Another independent of this education summit that's going to be announced this summer is an initiative. It's going to be a private initiative, but publicly endorsed, to make the goal of making Iowa the fittest state in the nation. We want to basically be the healthiest state in the nation, and that involves not only our youth, but also all of us at all ages. And the leadership from this is coming from Hy-Vee, from Rick Jerkins, who's the president and CEO of Hy-Vee, and also from John Forsythe from Wellmark, which is our largest health insurer in the state of Iowa, and also Doug Reichart. But they've also reached out to many others. We met with the Iowa Academy of Pediatric Physicians today. They're the ones that provide health care for children, but also general practice physicians are very interested in this. We need to get all Iowans to basically take ownership of their own health, and we need to start, as you said, in the schools, in providing encouraging physical fitness and exercise, but also good nutrition. I know this is something that Senator Harkin has been also working on, is we want to make sure that we have healthier meals and better nutrition. Interestingly, this issue came up at the governor's meeting. The governor of Vermont approached me about joining with them and saying, replacing the the commodity program that presently takes care of the student of the school hot lunch program with essentially a voucher that would be equal to the same amount, so that states and individual school districts could purchase food directly in their own state. And he was saying, for example, they raise apples in Vermont, they have to ship them to Boston, and then get them back as commodities from Boston. By that time, they're mushy. And he says, why couldn't we just buy them directly in Vermont from the producers and have a better, healthier product? So there's some things I think we can do. Some of it can be done with some help at the national level, giving the states more flexibility instead of surplus commodities, basically giving us the same, we're not asking for more, but just equal amount of resources, but more flexibility for states and local school districts in terms of that program. But I have a daughter that's a third grade teacher, and she is, like you, very interested in the health and well-being of the children. She's concerned about both the need for more physical exercise and physical education, but also for the nutrition and the type of food that the students are consuming in their schools as well.
When I was teaching, I did a survey of an entire class, which was quite large, having them put down what they ate, drank, whatever. And it was totally eye-opening. And then I compared fitness level and grade level. And you just drew a line. Those that skipped meals, that had no vegetables, that drank pop instead of milk, and it was just boom. Here were the failing students and the ones that ate well and were fit. Were right up there.
Well, we'd like to recruit you to help in this Healthiest State in the Nation initiative, because I think you've got the right attitude. I mean, you also have statistics and information to back that up. I would just say, my own observation is some of the best students are also some of the best athletes, and maybe it's because they manage their time well, they eat right and things like that, but those things are all important, and I think you make a very good point, and I think that's also part of what we need to do to improve education, is also to make sure that we're working on, and those are lifelong habits. Those are lifelong habits. If we can get kids not to start using tobacco products, and for really eating more fruits and vegetables and getting the appropriate amount of exercise, they'll live longer and be healthier, and they'll also achieve at a higher level in school and be able to get a better job. So I think you're right on.
My name is Gary Osbaker, concerned grandparent.
Yes.
Recently returned to the community. I'm also a distinguished technologist with Hewlett-Packard. I run development organizations in Mumbai, Russia, Moscow, Shanghai, Grenoble, and interestingly, Omaha. My question is, if we're going to improve our educational system, we need an assessment of what's wrong. I've seen down statistics. I think we all accept the fact that there's been an erosion in performance. We can't fix it if we don't know what's broken. We can't invest in it if we don't know where to invest. And it isn't even clear that we should invest, because we spend more per student than most other developed nations in the world, and we get a lower return for our investment. Can you comment on what needs to be fixed?
Well, the first thing that needs to be fixed is that we need to have assessments that teachers have confidence in. You know, there's a lot of concern that we've heard from teachers that the standardized tests we're using now don't adequately reflect the curriculum, and we're aware of that, and we're looking at that. And teachers also, so we need standardized tests that really reflect the curriculum, but we also need, you know, tests that teachers can use throughout the school year that help accurately reflect where students are at, where their weaknesses are, where their strengths are, and how do we help them improve as they move through the school year. And that needs to be information that's readily available, not just to teachers, but to students and their parents, so everybody's on the same page. You know, those are the two primary things we need to focus on in terms of assessment.
What a lot of states have done is they've passed state standards, and then they align assessments with the standards. And unfortunately, we in Iowa, at the time that this whole standards movement started, we were kind of best in America, and we had a kind of a complacency. People said, well, we're a local control state, we don't need to have state standards, we can do that. Well, the result is, other states did set standards and made changes in assessment, and they have moved up. And we have, not that we have necessarily dropped, we've just stayed pretty stagnant, while other states have gone ahead of us. And that's what we feel we need to change. And we've begun that process with the Iowa Core, and now the State Board of Education has approved the Common Core standards. And this is the direction that most of the other states have gone. So we're playing kind of catch up there, but I think that's something we need to do, and then we also need to, obviously, once we have that information, we need to be able to utilize that to help teachers and recognize what teachers are really being effective, and then ones that aren't being as effective, how can we help them to be better and more effective, and use maybe some of the best teachers to coach and help people improve their skills. Those are the kinds of things that we think we need to do to get into a leadership position and be truly world-class competitive. And obviously, where you've been around the world, you know the kind of competition that we're up against, and the tremendous commitment that the families and the countries are making to this.
And the only other piece of that I would add is, where you set rigorous state standards, strong national assessment to match throughout the year, but in addition to that, giving local school districts the flexibility to really meet those standards. I think with No Child Left Behind, some of the concerns with that, it was a cookie cutter mold and it was not applicable in all areas. So while we set those standards, and teachers are clear, concise standards, so they know what the objective is, a good, strong assessment piece with the flexibility. In addition to that, hopefully the Department of Education would have a template of some of the assessment piece, so educators and school districts can maybe have a starting point, but they would have the flexibility to try some different things to reach those goals.
Yes, sir. Yeah, you go ahead.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here with you. My name's Richard Bell. I'm the head of Maharshi School in Fairfield, Iowa. It's a private school. But I want to do a kind of a comparison between North Carolina and Iowa, if I could, because I spent several years there and founded a public charter school in North Carolina. You mentioned Governor Hunt coming. So my question is...
You probably know Governor Hunt then, probably on a first-name basis.
Not quite. But they were very supportive. I think one of the questions I have has to do with charter schools. Another one has to do with the Iowa Core, and the third has to do with this China initiative that's mentioned. The first is that in North Carolina, they had a cap on the number of charter schools. It frustrated people, but they did a pretty good job of accountability for the charter schools, so that charters could be a very integral part of innovation in that state. And our school had to do with global education and environmental studies. There were schools that were Greek immersion. There were other schools that were targeted to count with different populations. And so it's a very diverse mix of charter schools. Some of those are in the highest performing in the United States. Coming here to Iowa, I find that the charter law is considered one of the least progressive, let's say that generously.
Yes, that's an understatement.
Basically on the same par as only one of the states that's considered as core, and that's Mississippi. So I think that really I want to know where your administration will stand in terms of changing the charter law is one question.
One of the reasons why we've got Governor Hunt coming, in addition to he started the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards, I served in that board for a while. That was the idea of the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards, was to develop for education what we have in medicine, where you've heard of board certified physicians in their specialty. Well, this is designed to do that for experienced quality teachers, and then put together a very rigorous assessment process that includes portfolios as well as examinations to become board certified, and then use those board certified teachers as mentors and as leaders and master teachers to improve education generally. So, but also, as you pointed out, North Carolina has, I think, a much more robust charter school system than we have in Iowa. Iowa's is very limited and frankly not nearly as effective, I think, as a lot of other states. I think we need to have that opportunity for experimentation and competition, and we need to look at what's the best charter school law in the country and see if we can do something similar to that here in Iowa.
But the second contrast I'd like to draw is between the core of the standards.
Yes.
In North Carolina, as a public charter school, we were obligated to follow the standards. They were basically in 2 volumes about this size. They were content standards.
Okay.
That was okay, and it gave us an opportunity to look at curriculum so there wasn't an overlap or a gap. But when it came to Iowa, we found this really, 3 years now, just when this Iowa core is rolling out. And what's so impressive about it is that it's not just content standards, but how to teach and the characteristics of effective instruction. I've been very
So you actually find it better than what you saw in North
I
Carolina?
definitely do. I think that they're looking at it in a more comprehensive way. They're looking at these elements of rigor and relevance. And I've been a little concerned is all the effort that's been invested in the development of this. And what I hear is there's some concerns about whether it'll be continued. And the momentum that's been built towards that more really comprehensive and deeper approach to learning is going to be continued with the Iowa Core. And I know the Common Core is being attached to it as well, but I think Iowa's really to be congratulated with what the approach that they took when they did establish this. As
We just got involved in it pretty late compared to a lot of other states. But I'm pleased to hear your comments, having had the experience in North Carolina, coming here and having that. And I guess there is a certain amount of skepticism about it because, we haven't been very successful in the past. But I appreciate hearing your comments. And I think Jason Glass is in the process of reviewing those. He wants to build on they're not looking at scrapping them, but I think building on them, adding the additional national, which was really, I think, very strongly recommended by Arnie Duncan. And I think, frankly, if we're going to be able to compete for the race for the top monies and things like that, we have to move in that direction.
I'll start as one of the comments.
One more?
Yeah. Good. So we spent a month in China, visited 12 different cities just in March, talked to students, parents, and while I understand the incentive that we have to go for higher test scores, what you hear from a lot of educators, a lot of parents, a lot of kids in China is that virtually eliminates the sense of creativity in their system. And a lot of these kids are coming now. We have 5 students that have been joining us from China in about 2 weeks. Who are coming to the United States, not only learn English and attend American schools, but to be in a system that allows them to have some creative input into that experience. So I don't think that it's appropriate to...
We don't want to destroy creativity in the process.
That's one of the
No.
components of our report.
Yeah, and I think you're right. And historically, America has been a real leader in that, and that's why we've had a lot of the patents and things like that come out of here. And I won't say it, but the Chinese are really good at copying what we do, unfortunately. But they've been able to perfect it very well. But they also, so I think we don't want to do this to stifle creativity, and indeed we want to try to change the way we teach to encourage creativity and more collaboration among students to come up with new ideas and better ways to do things. And that's, I'm sure you followed what's happened in the workplace and what's happened in the American workplace. And actually it was Dr. Deming, who was born in Sioux City, Iowa, that taught the Japanese continuous improvement. And now America has done that, and that's was very instrumental in helping much of our manufacturing kind of become competitive again.
I was gonna- and then I'll let Linda, because she's really been working on this, but the other thing that we've talked a lot about is really bringing that entrepreneurship, down to the lower levels, to not, we're waiting too late to start that we need to be starting that in elementary, so we can, grade school, so we can get these kids challenged to thinking outside of the box, critical thinking, creative thinking, so that's a big part of what we would, and especially through innovation, that we have an opportunity to do that, I think, and to encourage that.
John Papajohn, by the way, is an entrepreneur from Iowa who's been a real leader and put money into entrepreneurial centers around the state.
I just wanted to add, I just finished reading a paper called Finnish Lessons by Pasi Sahlberg. He's one of the speakers at the summit coming up. And what was most interesting to me about that was his insight into how Finland reshaped its school system to go from being average to good to great. And he talked a lot about how Finland looked all over the world to see what's working, what works here, what works there, what can we bring in that will work for us. And they sort of grafted all of that into something that also had Finland's values at the heart of it, and I think that's one of our challenges. We need to look around at what works elsewhere. We also need to look at what will work here. Iowa is Iowa. It's not other states. It's not other countries and nations. So we need the right thing for us, but we need to, with a really open mind, look around at what works in other places, and then use our best ideas here to create the right strategy for our state.
What was the name of that book?
It's called, it's a forthcoming book. I don't know if it's out. I got a paper on, it's online. If you Google Finnish, F-I-N-N-I-S-H, lessons, and the author's Pasi Sahlberg, P-A-S-I-S-A-H-L-B-E-R-G. I was able to get the early chapters of it. I don't know if the whole thing is out yet, but just that introduction was really worth reading.
By the way, Thomas Friedman's got another book coming out too, and you know, he's a pretty well-respected author. He spoke at the National Governors Meeting. He kind of gave us a preview of what that's going to be, but that's very much along the lines of the kind of things we're talking about here, and how other nations, and much as a couple of you gentlemen have already brought up, what they're doing elsewhere, and what we have to do to compete in this flatter world that we're in. Over here, I guess.
Thank you. We'll go together. I'm Susan Wilkenbush from Victor, and I've been a teacher and still studying gifted education right now. But you're in a classroom now, you have a wide range of students in every classroom. You've got the ones several grades ahead, the ones several grades below, and even your average kids may be way up here in math and way down here in reading or whatever. There are charter schools in Minnesota, probably elsewhere, that do a system where you are placed by where you are in each subject. So maybe the first hour of the day everyone would be teaching math and you'd be in a low math class, but maybe the second hour for reading you'd be in, you know, several subjects. All the 7-year-olds are not in the same classroom. You might have 7, 8, 9, 10 in the same classroom, but that seems to work. And separating boys from girls seems to work. There's a lot of research out there that tells us what works. But we are still, with the education system that was Little House on the Prairie in our society has changed so much that I would encourage you to be brave and look at. And those things wouldn't have to cost any more than what we're doing now. It's just we've got to push ourselves out of this comfort zone and try something really new. And I'm probably as conservative as anybody in here, but
I agree with you.
I hear that a lot.
And I think the point you made about North Carolina with their charter system, when they had a lot of different things, and they let people experiment with different things, and maybe not every one of them is going to work, but I think we've got to be willing to try and give some schools the freedom to have a charter that maybe has boys and girls separated. My wife went to a girls' school. She went to St. Joseph Academy. It didn't hurt her, actually. But I think that, I think your point is a good one. And the other thing I think we've learned is kids learn at different rates. And the old style of just having the teacher stand up and lecture to kids is maybe not that, especially when you want to encourage creativity and collaborative learning. And we're finding more and more sometimes that those techniques can be much more effective.
I think too, we've heard that, you know, we've been tinkering around the edges for too long. It's the flavor of the year, we're gonna try this, we continually try to maybe fix a system that's broken. It's really, we need to be bold, and we need to really make some dramatic changes and do the right thing and just excite not only our educators, but our students and community as well.
and the research is there to show what works. We just have to be brave enough to do it and do it, not just not.
Right.
Charter schools maybe, but.
Okay. Liddy?
Just one comment as a follow-up of that. I'm just curious on your take of the whole inclusion principle in education. You know, I don't know how long it's been that we've had to have all levels of development and abilities just put into the classroom together, and how much of a problem that's been.
It goes back to the Individuals with Disability Education Act, which the original one was probably 25, 30 years ago, 1975. I happened to be appointed by President George W. Bush to chair the commission that reviewed and recommended the reauthorization of the Individuals with Disability Education Act. I think before we had that, we had people that had disabilities that were denied an education. And so the idea was to mainstream them and give them educational opportunity. There have been some problems with severely handicapped kids being in the classrooms and some of the disruptions and problems that can occur along with it. The law requires that they every one of those children be given an individual education plan that would be designed to fit their needs, and so they can be challenged to be able to learn at the highest level possible. And I think there's been a lot of good things that have come of that. I also, in chairing that commission, got an earful from a lot of parents and teachers and school administrators about that system. And one of the things that I think we learned, and I think the reauthorization that passed a few years ago tries to put more emphasis on, instead of waiting for kids to end up in a remedial program and end up in special ed, to, especially in reading, in early grades, provide some intensive assistance to kids, because if they can get up to speed in reading, they don't end up being in special ed, and once they get in special ed, end up staying in special ed pretty much the rest of their school year. So those are the kind of things, but I think in terms of, that's a federal law, we have an obligation to live with it, and I do know that it has created some challenges, but there's also been some benefits to mainstreaming these kids and to the understanding that other kids that are in the classroom with kids with disabilities have, and the friendships and the working together that's occurred as a result of that. Okay.
I'd like to pick up on your comment a little bit about IDEA reauthorization. Governor Branstad, I understand that the legislature passed $20 million cut to ADAs for this year, and $10 million for next year. And so with child fine, I guess I would wonder if that's something that you, as governor, will approve, because I am a school board member and also Lisa. My concern would be to some of our most vulnerable students getting the learning supports that they need.
I think there's been some concern for some time with the administrative costs in the area education agencies. The area education agencies do have not only special ed, but they have other programs that they oversee, including, what is it? Yeah, hearing and speech, but in addition to that, films and media and those kinds of things. And generally, looking at the budget problems that we're facing in the state, I would say not only the legislature, but certainly we recommended a reduction in the funding in that area, because we just felt there were some administrative costs, and there can be some consolidation, I think, in reducing administrative costs that we think, at the same time, respecting the fact that we have an obligation to meet the special education needs, and you know there is a weighting formula for special ed for school districts. But we've gone through and expect that there will be even more reorganization going on, with especially on the administrative side in terms of the area education agencies. So that's one of the areas of the budget, you're right, was reduced in this year and in the coming year. Yes, sir.
I'm John Shelba. I've been the superintendent at Tumwa the last 5 years, and actually I'm now the chief administrator at the ADA, so I'm not going to talk about that. We used our stimulus dollars in Tumwa over the last 3 years now, federal stimulus dollars, to identify students who were not proficient and to extend learning time, both during the summer and during the school week. The students that we identified, almost without exception, are students that live in poverty. Can you speak a little bit to the political will that might be ready to look at how kids who live in poverty might need a different level of resources to close the achievement gap? I think it's a lot more about socioeconomics even than it is ethnicity, at least in our district.
Well, and I think we recognize that with the recommendations I made in the 4-year-old preschool, saying that we ought to target those resources to the kids in poverty, and that a lot of families can afford to pay it, and they should pay it, so that the limited resources we have are focused where it's going to make the most difference. I mean, years ago, I sent my kids to preschool, way back in Lake Mills 30 years ago. And a lot of families have been doing that for a long time. and all of a sudden it's free for everybody. And I just think instead of making it free for everybody that can afford to pay it, we ought to target the resources on kids that come from families in poverty that can't afford it, and they need to have that preschool and preparation. We need to make, there's also an empowerment program to help early childhood as well, because we know brain development starts even before birth. We need to do all we can to stimulate and support kids so they do start school ready to learn.
Has there been any conversation to this point about the possibility of looking at the foundation formula and how poverty impacts expenses of providing student services?
Well, that's a good question. The foundation formula, and I think as we go through this education summit, I think everything ought to be on the table. We ought to look at everything, and obviously, how do you determine that? And I guess you could probably get some valid statistical information about levels of poverty. And I guess what you're saying is put more resources into schools where there's poverty than ones that are more affluent.
Well,
in many
some
cases,
kind of differentiation.
or some kind of differentiation. We do that in special ed, as you know, with the weighting program. So there could be ways to do that. And I guess I would be open to looking at what will work, what's going to get us results. I think that's what we're looking at, and Linda has a comment on that.
I know you don't want my whole reading list for the last 6 months, but I will share something I just read as I was getting ready for the summit. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which administers PISA, as you know, does a lot of little sort of short focus papers. It has one out about kids who are low-income children who perform at high levels, and what are the factors that seem to be around those children. And that is also online too. If you look for the word resilient in performance, in OECD, it'll pop up. And what the studies found is that about 30%, depends on the society, but around on average 31% of low-income kids in OECD countries who take PISA are resilient, meaning they score in the top quarter of performers. And what those low-income kids have in common is that they tend to spend more time in school. For example, in high school, they're taking more classes, more difficult classes. Somehow they've come through the system with the capacity to do that. But timed learning, not surprisingly, is a big factor in helping kids progress. And I just found that really interesting. And it's only about a 4-page paper, but well worth taking a look at.
I think we've always said too, education is a great leveler. You can grow up poor, but if you get a quality, my Jewish mother always said, get a good education because they can't take that away from you. And I think that's very true. So it is, and that's one of the reasons why we need to make sure that kids, regardless of their background, get the opportunity. Because, and in some cases, it's a challenge because if the parents don't recognize how important that is. My daughter, who teaches 3rd grade, says, if the parents are involved in encouraging and supporting the child, they tend to do a lot better than if they have a lot of problems at home and the parents are really kind of disengaged and don't go and meet with the teacher and don't really see that the child does homework and stuff like that. Yes, sir.
Jim will be at risk in the future, and I wonder if you could comment on what the future of ACE funding is for those types of innovations and to underwrite that type of courage locally.
Well, that's one of the budgets that we have not finalized on. The legislature didn't get done until the last day of the fiscal year, and they gave me 30 days, so that was the 30th of June. I've got 30 days to sign or veto all of those bills, and we are systematically going through. And in fact, we'll go back to Des Moines tonight to go over some of those budgets. So we've not made final decisions on that. It is a difficult situation in terms of the whole budget process because we did inherit a mess. Not as bad as Chris Christie did in New Jersey, but our situation was that they used a lot of one-time money for ongoing expenses that was no longer available in the past year. And even they delegated, well, as an example, Medicaid. That's an entitlement program, provides health care for low-income people. It's an important program. And they use one-time money. So we had to come up with $540 million of ongoing general fund money to just to maintain that program. And then you had the indigent defense. You probably heard about the lawyers that defended the criminal defendants, and then they weren't getting paid come January, because the previous legislature knew that the cost was going to estimated to be 40 million, but they only appropriated 20 million, so they basically misled the public as the level of spending and just pushed it into the next year for the next legislature to deal with. And then we had $84 million of undefined spending cuts that they just delegated to Governor Culver to make, but he didn't make the cut until a week before he left office. And we identified 40 million of that as actually going to impair public safety because it would put dangerous people out of prison or out of our mental health institutes, that we had to reinstate that. So because of all of that and our commitment to make sure we had a budget that's sustainable for the long term, that's why we had to make a lot of the budget decisions we did. Now, the good news is this: the budget we put together is for the first time since the 1980s, essentially a 2-year budget. The second year we have 85%, including school aid and Medicaid funded in the second year already. And we're spending less than we take in, which is something that's not been done for 4 years because they've used one-time money and trust fund money to do it. And we projected out for 5 years with reasonable revenue growth. It's sustainable, which means we can sustain it without across-the-board cuts and without the kind of the disruptions you've had in the past. But obviously, we're going to be looking at that, and we do understand there's some really innovative programs, and I would compliment you on what you've done. I've also seen, for instance, I was up in Monticello and saw where Kirkwood's doing a program with 6 small school districts up there, offering some vocational technical courses, and I think also higher levels of math and science that they otherwise couldn't do individually. I think that collaboration is good. Another thing we do, and you do through the community colleges, is open enrollment. We're advanced, and I saw personally one family in Boone. When I got to be the president of one university, I met this young woman named Katie Howe. She was the youngest student we had in medical school, and I found out why. She got enough courses through dual enrollment from DMAC in Boone to graduate from the community college at the same time she graduated from high school. And then she went to Iowa State, and then she trained, and then she came to medical school at Des Moines University. Not only she did that, her 2 younger brothers have done the same thing. Now, the really good news about Katie Howe is she's completed her residency out in Las Vegas and come back and taken the job as an emergency room physician in the Boone Hospital in her hometown. So that I consider a real success story. But I think dual enrollment and what the opportunity for students, and this also saves parents money too, because they can get a year, or sometime in her case even a couple of years credit even before they're out of high school. And that's also recognized that the kids learn at a different rate. So some of your advanced kids, having them take some of these college credit courses while they're still in high school, I think is a good way to keep them motivated and involved and getting an early start on their college career. We have time for yes.
Kind of start with your platform. Think critically, solve problems, think effectively, and innovation. Great. Very much in favor of those things. I'm the director of instruction for the fellow schools, so as we talk to our business and industry partners, that's what they want.
Yeah.
And it's also what appears in the Iowa Core Universal Construct in 20% skills. At the same time, going on with that, there are federal tests being developed for the Common Core, which are more content-oriented. And when we get all done with this, we're at some point going to want to say this work would be a definition of success. So I guess that's my question is, what will the definition of success be? And going with what gets measured gets done, what are we going to measure to say, yes?
That's a great question.
Yeah, I think we want kids who can compete. We want our Iowa students to be able to compete with the kids in the highest performing school systems in the world. And that is, as you know, is not a static thing. I mean, all those high performing school systems have an ethic of continual improvement. Canada is a high performer on the 15-year-old test, PISA. Alberta is the highest performing province in Canada. And if you go to Alberta Education website, you can see that they are constantly looking at how they improve. Finland does that, Singapore does that, Japan does that. We've talked about there's a great thirst in other places to keep improving, and that's in some other states here as well. But I think our kids need to be able to perform as well on the international benchmarks that we have as the top performing kids. That's when we'll know we're there. And, you talked about, I think one of the interesting questions you raised is innovation and creativity, and it kind of begs the question, how do we teach that? I was in a third grade classroom a few years ago at Crestview Elementary School in Clive, actually. And the teacher there, Adam Lt, had his third graders. They seemed like almost like young, they were 8-year-olds who sort of had all the skills of a corporate team working on a project. They were blogging with kids in a town in Australia. They were using what they were doing with that blog as part of their English and spelling lesson. They were learning how to cooperate and communicate well. And then they had smart boards that they used after that to talk about strategies they were working on for a project. So I think, we have to have teachers like Adam Lt at Crestview Elementary School who really understand how you incorporate all of that into a lesson, and I think it's exciting. The possibilities are very exciting.
Well, I experienced that same thing with Van Meter. I mean, it was exciting to see students marketing to another country, their hometown in Van Meter, Iowa, and they were doing it through the internet, and it was just all kinds of communication skills, marketing skills. It was just a phenomenal project. And what I really liked was just the engagement of the kids. I mean, when that bell rang, they were in those laptops were flipped up and they were ready to go. So, we were capturing the excitement of them to be engaged and to really talk to these other kids in another country about why Van Meter is a great place to live.
I totally agree with that, but my one concern is, will those things show up on a piece of text and an ink pen? And that's what we want.
Yeah, some of those things, and creativity probably is very, well, some of those things, I don't know, they're not easy to measure.
The PISA exam actually does have students apply skills to real-world situations. It's not a rote, bubble test, all the way through. It is a test that really requires some analytical, creative thinking on the part of students. That's why it's a fairly highly regarded test.
I can tell you, from personal experience, when I took the job at Du Bois University, I wanted my salary to be dependent on results. And so what we did is, I worked out with the Board of Trustees a situation where they used objective criteria to measure, in other words, how many of our students passed their board exams, how much money I raised for the school, how well we did on various things. One of the big things that I was asked to do is to help raise the visibility, respect, and recognition of the school. We didn't know how to measure that. So I felt that we made some real progress in making Du Bois University, raising the visibility, respect, and recognition of the school and whatever. But I never got any credit for that. But I still probably feel really good about what we accomplished. We became the first college or university in the country to become recognized by the Wellness Council of America as a platinum level. We're the first college or university to do that. Some businesses have done it. We got the platinum level recognition for what we did for wellness for our faculty, staff, and students. We became a totally tobacco-free campus. We put together a wellness center. We developed nutrition and exercise into the curriculum and did all these kinds of things. But we didn't have an objective way to measure it, and so we didn't get credit for it. And so sometimes you do the right thing and you're not going to get credit for it necessarily, but it's still worth doing. I think, yes.
I just like Sean was saying, I appreciate your comments on understanding that teachers are the best at knowing how to assess teaching, and I hope that as we go forward, that is related throughout the policy that comes out of this education summit. And I really respect the idea that we're trying to emulate the world's best schools and this 21st century global education. And I think a great way to start doing that is through these global education conferences. And as I'm sure you were briefed on the International Summit on the teaching profession, has greatly emphasized the importance of the government and teachers' organizations working together to raise student achievement and to raise school performance. And I think here in the state of Iowa, in my short tenure working with the Iowa State Education Association, we've had a positive relationship with that. Jason Glasgow to speak at our delegate assembly, I think speaks well of that. My one concern, and I don't mean this to be attacking at all, is with Chris Christie coming in and calling union leaders thugs and disinterested in education, really self-serving. I was just wondering, do you support and endorse those ideas, or do you plan on continuing to work?
New Jersey's a different state than Iowa. I don't know if you've ever been to New Jersey, but New Jersey's a pretty tough place. It's a pretty tough place, and he inherited a real mess. And in fact, you know, New Jersey is one of those places where a lot of their political leaders have gone to prison. You know, so he came from a prosecutor background and all of that sort of thing. But I do respect what he's done. And I think part of the problem was you had people that have had, I could go into what, you know, some of the financial problems that they had. The retirement system is one, for instance. Like I said, it was only funded to 54%. They also had a COLA. So they have suspended the COLA for the next 30 years. I don't think that's unreasonable when you, in order to try to get, and what he's trying to do is really save the system for the benefit of the teachers. But there are some people that just want to take and aren't willing to recognize, and the taxpayers, of course, also have a huge stake in that and are paying a very significant cost. And I think he's had the courage to kind of point out the other point of view on that. And he's obviously been attacked by interest groups that have a lot of resources and have had their way for a long time. So you just need to know that circumstance of the situation. And it's not easy, and I have empathy for these other governors that are going through. I was governor of Iowa during the farm crisis of the 80s. I'm glad to be governor now when the agriculture is so strong, because in the 80s, it was really tough here. You know, you may recall we had a distressed farmer that killed his wife and killed his banker and killed himself at Hills, Iowa, not too far from here. I was governor during that time. And some of these states on the East Coast and the West Coast are going through financial problems very similar to that. And when you have that situation and you're a leader and you have to make tough decisions, you're going to have people who are not necessarily going to be happy and are going to come to your meetings and shout at you and call you names and all this kind of stuff. But I think if you look at it, and I've looked on YouTube and I've seen how he's handled those situations, and I think he's handled them. He doesn't lose his cool, and I think he's been very straightforward in the way that he's done it. And I'll be anxious to see how he performs at the Iowa Summit, but I would just encourage you to listen and see what he has to say. But I think that, I personally think that considering the mess that he inherited, I think he's, and you know, he got bipartisan support to get those reforms through a legislature that's controlled by the other party. That's never an easy thing to do.
I would just add to that, too. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to add to, oh, no, go ahead, you know.
I would say, you know, I think you're asking about, are we interested in collaborating, working with teachers?
Yeah, I want the focus of the question was on Iowa.
Yeah, we very much want to hear what teachers think will work and work with teachers to move forward. Ontario, Canada, is a province that's really had huge success by using that kind of a model, which we no doubt know. And, you know, in Illinois, teachers were very involved in helping move reform forward. They were somewhat involved in Colorado. You know, I think that that's the model that's going to be most sustainable and probably have the most success in the long run.
Well, and I was just going to say that the governor got to talk about his daughter that is an educator, but I wanted to throw my 2 cents in also. My daughter is also an educator. She teaches first grade. Next year she'll be beginning her 3rd year in teaching. She's taught summer school this summer. And I want to be honest, it's the first time that I ever had an educator in my family. So it has been extremely eye-opening for me to see what they deal with, the situations that they have to deal with, and the amount of time that they put in. So, and I've also served in the legislature 2 years in the state senate, and I served in the minority. But I tell you what, the debate is healthy. You need a diverse group at the table. That's how we get to the success that we need, by giving everybody the opportunity. And that's what, you know, to Linda's credit, I think she's done a phenomenal job of bringing a very diverse group of people to this summit, not only from all different states, but all different levels to educators. We had a panel last week where we heard from business, we heard from higher education, we heard from school board members, and we heard from teachers. They were, I mean, so that tells you right there the level of trying to reach out to grab everybody that we can. And the debate is healthy. We can't just put up a shield and say, I'm only going to hear one side. We don't grow and we don't get better by doing that. So I would like to compliment them on the diverse group that they put together to give us an opportunity to listen to everybody, then take a look at what Iowa needs and how Iowa can do the best job that they can with teachers, with the government, with the communities, with the parents. So thanks.
I would also say, and you might talk to some, maybe some older teachers that were around back in 1987. when I was governor before. We actually worked with the Iowa State Education Association and the School Board Association, put together the three-phase educational excellence law. Unfortunately, a lot of that has been either eliminated or diluted over the last several years. But I think, and that was have higher beginning teachers so we could hire salaries so we could attract more success. We could make teaching more attractive and then also the idea of the phase 3 money was to try to help retain and reward good teachers. So the difference between the 1980s and now, there's a lot of other outside groups like the Gates Foundation, the Lumina Foundation. There's a whole lot of business people and a lot of people have been successful and a lot of people that have had international experience and seeing what's going on in other parts of the world that wasn't as evident back in the 80s, that know that we cannot continue to be complacent, that we have to make some dramatic changes and improvements in order to succeed. And I can also tell you, and you can ask the people that I work with at Des Moines University in the academic community, you can imagine what they thought having a non-doctor, a non-academic, and a Republican as president of their school. But I thought I had to win them over, and one of the way I did, my style of leadership is collaborative, to try to get everybody involved in the process. I understand as a leader sometimes you have to make tough decisions and it's not going to make everybody happy, but the more you can try to get input and involvement from all the people that are affected, so you can try to come up, because collective thought from several people is better than just one person dictating what's going to happen. And that's what our whole goal is, and that's the whole reason for a very diverse group of people coming to. So you'll find people of all different political persuasions and different experiences and backgrounds participating, but we hope out of that process will come something that will really help us to be successful. And I think Arnie Duncan is going to be a great keynote speaker because his whole race for the top is a very competitive model to say, America, we got to wake up. We're in a world competition and we're not winning. And unless we change things pretty significantly, the future is not going to look so bright. So I really believe in Iowa, because of the work ethic and the strong tradition that we've had for support for education, that we're a state that can really make a difference. And that one thing I'd really like to be able to say, this could be a critical turning point that could really move Iowa in a very positive upward direction in educational achievement. Okay.
Yes. My name is Chris Jones, and I'm also with Maharishi University in Fairfield, which is, by the way, a hotbed of innovation and entrepreneurism.
You're correct. I think you have probably maybe more patents coming out of your area per capita than anywhere else in Iowa. So that would confirm what you said about innovation.
Yes. And I just have a comment really that I think in addition to looking at test scores and achievement in the test scores, I would agree with the gentleman over here from Pella who was emphasizing creativity. The other thing that I would emphasize in addition to achievement in test scores is the quality of life of both the students and the teachers. And I'm particularly concerned, I'm a teacher, educator, and in fact I came to the recent meeting you had in Des Moines for teacher educators. And what I've noticed in the research is that what draws teachers is not only salary, and of course salary is important, and I do think that we should continue to ramp up the salary for teachers in Iowa, but also quality of life. And in fact, quality of life turns out to be a greater indicator of a teacher's inclination to go for one job or another than does the salary, or at least they're willing to take a lower salary if the quality of teaching, the quality of life is better. And so I think that's something that we ought to take very seriously when we're looking at both
respect, recognition,
Right.
And that's something we have to do as a society is show that we value teachers, respect and appreciate what they do.
Right. And the quality of life on the job that they live, the more stressful that becomes, on top of the low pay, the greater difficulty we're going to have in attracting the high-quality teacher that we've been talking about and retaining those that we have here. And one particular touch point that I would focus on in the summit if I were more involved,
Okay.
would be the idea of one teacher being in contact with 95 to 150 students. You know, I would go for something more along the block line, you know, where a teacher teaches 4 classes rather than 8 classes a day, where the classes are longer, allow for more sustained focus on one subject and fewer students. To me, that improves the quality of the teacher's life and the quality of what he or she can do with those students, gives them more fulfillment, so they're not seeing 95 people and having to keep track of them, 95 to 150 every day. So that's something I think that we should keep in mind in the equation that we're trying to find.
The other thing I think we hear from teachers is having a principal that is supportive and collaborative, that works with them, and backs them up when they discipline a student and some parent comes in and complains. When I was a kid, if you got in trouble at school, you were in bigger trouble at home. That's not always the case today. And that's important that teachers be able to manage the classroom and have the support of the administration and the parents to do so.
Yeah, I think they ask for more collaboration among teachers also, more time, and then professional development that really made a difference, to really take a look at the professional development that they were being offered and make it more applicable.
Okay, yes.
My name is Tim Hadley. I'm an instructor at Beacon High School, very close to here. Mike, I have one comment and one question, but my concern is when comparing ourselves to a country such as China, I've attended several homecomings of soldiers. I've volunteered with the National Guard Youth Program. I guess I miss China's involvement in our current operations overseas, and I'm wondering how much emphasis we need to place on academic achievement when I see a lot of my students who have graduated recently with high academics now working for students who had low academics. And I think it follows with this, you know, looking at the whole student, and well, from the beginning of being taught as an educator, you're taught that one of your primary responsibilities is to develop good citizens. And I think we just need to be careful when comparing ourselves to how China is run as a country and their influence. I think we need to look at Asian suicide rates. How high are they, and the problems that they experience?
Well, first of all, we're complimenting them on achievement for their students, but I certainly wouldn't want to follow the way they run their country. They are a communist country,
right,
and the government they don't have the freedoms and the opportunities we have in this country, and we don't want anybody to get the wrong impression. We're certainly not saying we don't want to emulate that.
But when we discuss 10, 12-hour days of schools, tutors, salaries.
And I hear what you're saying. So you're saying some of those countries, Singapore and China and whatever, they're not exactly democratic in the way they do things. I hear what you're saying on that too, and I think we need to respect our values, but I think we also need to make sure we have rigorous standards and that we are doing all we can to motivate our students to achieve at the highest level they can. But I think we can do that consistent with our democratic values. But I'm glad you brought that up, because I don't want anybody to get the impression that we want to emulate the way they run their government or some of their other things.
I didn't feel that impression, but I just want to make sure that.
No, I think you make a good point, and I'm glad you brought that up. And you're right, sometimes, some of the best, most successful people are people that dropped out of college, too. But they were also very creative. Bill Gates is an example of that. There are many others that fall in that category. I can think of someone in Iowa. Gary Vermeer. He was a farmer who just had an ability to. He invented the hoist wagon, the big round baler, and a bunch of things like that. Built a great company, and his daughter's running it today. She's the president of the National Manufacturers Association. Okay.
Tom Rubel, Indian Hills Community College. In the video that was shown was great. But if you would have noticed in there, a lot of the students aspire to be lawyers and teachers and in the professional ranks with 4-year degrees. And we all need those folks serving our culture. But I would have to say that I think we're a little remiss on occasions not to pay closer attention to career and technical education. Auto technicians and welders and lasers and health occ positions and so on. and getting wrapped up with rigor. The word relevancy continues to be absolutely necessary in our preparation. There's a large number of our students in the 11th and 12th grade that do not perceive themselves to go to a four-year institution and graduate. There's a place for those students in our community colleges, and let's keep an eye on that group of students as well.
Your point is really good. I think one of the reasons why students drop out or fail to achieve is they don't see the relevancy of the classes they're taking to what they're going to do in life. And we've got to do a better job of connecting that. This is important because it's going to make a difference. I think that's one of our challenges in education.
Well, they need to leave high school prepared to either do some post-secondary education or with a skill, so they're ready to provide for themselves, and that's what we need to make sure that we're doing. Realizing that it doesn't have to be a four-year degree. In fact, there's a lot of jobs out there that we're not going to have the workforce to meet those needs if we don't identify the individuals really that are better positioned to go into a two-year career and start to work and excel where they can.
We're getting calls at Indian Hills daily.
Yeah.
In terms of looking for diesel mechanics and welders,
exactly.
And so there's work out there, but there's no question you need to have the right skill set, and that skill set isn't always.
It's not always a four-year degree. Absolutely, we agree with that. Yes, in the back.
Kirk McGill, I'm technology coordinator right here in Sigourney. I've got 5 kids in the school district here, and other than involved parents and a few really good teachers, the 2 things I think that I've seen made the biggest impact on most of my kids so far have been, one is the relationship that we've created with Indian Hills and the opportunities that that has provided for them with both the career and technical stuff, but also, you know, a lot of school districts you've seen lately have jumped on the one-to-one bandwagon, and having supported that in 3 districts now, I'm just wondering, you know, so I encourage this. I encourage the relationship that the schools have. I encourage you guys to keep that in the mindset when you're making those decisions. But also, are you looking at anything when it comes to supporting the one-to-one initiative as a statewide plan, or is that something you're going to let schools continue to make decisions on their own?
You want to?
You know, I think you're hitting on something that's really important. A really big challenge that schools know they face already is we have to figure out how to meet it, is with limited dollars, how to make the best use of technology that serves students, both in terms of technology being a resource to know about things as well as a learning tool, you know, in their core content classes. As you probably know, there's a lot of talk now about blended learning, where you try to make the best use of students' and teachers' time in the classroom by using that combination of online resources along with more traditional class time. And it's a big challenge to figure out how to do that. One of the afternoon panels at the Education Summit on Monday is looking at that very issue of digital learning and how do you do it effectively. I don't think anybody's quite figured out what the right answer is, but one-to-one laptop initiatives seem to have had a lot of initial success.
Yeah, there's a lot of schools. I mean, we were the 3rd in Sigourney to really jump after it, or 4th, 3rd was Cardinal, but then Beacon's on. We've got a lot of schools right here in our county that have moved on with one-to-one initiative, and so you look at there's a lot of schools moving that direction. You mentioned Van Meter earlier, so you start to wonder when does the state take some initiative to help us.
Well, the state does, for instance, you can use the Pebble funding for that. I think also the sales tax money can be used for that purpose too. It's not just for bricks and mortar, it can be used for technology as well. So there is some flexibility that the state has provided to local school districts. We've left that to the local school districts kind of decide. And I don't know that the state's going to go in and mandate everybody have one-for-one. I do think there's some real benefit to that. At Des Moines University, we were totally a wireless campus, and every student was issued a computer before they started medical school or their health science graduate career. And my youngest son went to University. I think they were probably about the first in the state to do that at the higher level. But I think that's the way to the future. I have a 5-year-old that has her own computer or has the, what do you call it, iPad. She has an iPad, she's teaching her grandmother how to run an iPad.
We have time for one last question.
Thank you.
Anyone with another question?
Yes.
Have a comment. Excuse me.
Or comment?
I've taught school for many, many years, and just listening today and going back and looking and seeing things that have been done, there's some things that I've noticed that have been kind of a thorn in my side that have kind of, I think we need to address. Number one is we need to get the parents of the students on board. I've noticed over the years that we're getting less and less and less support
Right.
from the families. And I think it's very important, I know when you're talking about some of these other countries, China and so on, you hear about how much the families are involved and how important education is. And I do not think, not just in the state of Iowa, but anywhere, that education sits up here in a lot of people's eyes. And I think we really need to that. We need to make that a more respected profession. The other area is professional development. I've sat through many professional development meetings that are totally meaningless. We need to have relevant professional development. It needs to be provided to staff at a time that is convenient and not pulled out of the classroom and a substitute teacher thrown in so you can go to a meeting room for 2 hours and then come back. We need relevant, meaningful